What's up, everyone? This is Joey. I'm also going to be presenting with Ryan in Asia, and we are going to be giving you a team failure presentation on Blockbuster, what they did right, what they did wrong, and kind of where a game went from there. Before we move into some of the details of the rise and fall of the entertainment giant that is Blockbuster, I want to take just a second to dive into what really made up the Blockbuster experience. So take a second and think back to the late 90s, early 2000s, when you were a kid just begging your parents to do something for this weekend. I can personally remember when my family pleading with my parents, please can we go to Blockbuster? Eventually, when I wore them down enough, we would hop in the car and drive over to the magical movie palace. Try to remember walking into the blue and yellow store, the scent of buttered popcorn still hanging in the air as you look down the aisles stocked full of all of your favorite movies. You tear down the aisles trying to find those perfect movies that'll hold you over till the weekend. As you walk by the counter with your arm full of your favorite movies, asking your parents, just one more movie. You can see the buckets of popcorn lined up next to the register, and they're the kinds that you can just pop into the microwave, and then you have a perfect bucket of buttered popcorn just like at the movie theaters. Blockbuster had done it. They had created the perfect movie night experience. That's what Blockbuster was selling. They weren't really in the business of selling just the movie rentals. They were trying to give you an experience. It was that experience that once the movie cabinet and your entertainment center had been depleted once again, you could go to Blockbuster and have a movie night just like if you had gone to the theater. Blockbuster had successfully put themselves in a position to not only be selling a product, but they put themselves in the hearts of all the kids of America that when it was time for movie night, I'm going to Blockbuster. Alright, so getting into some of the more details of kind of how Blockbuster started and got to this point where they were able to create this Blockbuster experience. So this is kind of a basic timeline of how they took the company from just a small startup to kind of this entertainment empire. So it started out in 1985 by David Cook. He just kind of had the idea of VHS video rentals. I don't know how many of you actually remember it, but I remember having a VHS player and having to rewind all the tapes. And what David Cook had this idea of is, what if people didn't have to buy all these VHS tapes, and what if they could just rent them for an evening, not have to worry about all the hassle of rewinding it back and then storing it again only to have the reel damage or something like that. He kind of had this idea where we can all put this together and take kind of the hassle behind watching a movie for the customers and give them just the enjoyment of it. And it was pretty successful. In 1987, they sold part of the business to a group of investors, which include Wayne Huizinga. And then later on, in 1987, Cook left Blockbuster, and the Huizinga assumed control of the company and moved its headquarters to just our backyard over here, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And under their leadership, Blockbuster embarked on an aggressive expansion plan, snapping up existing video store chains and opening a massive amount of new stores. What this holding company was really able to do, and the investors were able to do, was kind of try to take Blockbuster from this rinky-dink video rental store to try to expand it aggressively. And they were very successful in that. By 1988, Blockbuster was America's leading video chain with over 400 stores across the U.S. And in a very short period of time, they really went from a small company to massive. And then in 1990, Blockbuster launched their 1,000th store and started to expanding overseas into different countries. So it's just kind of, you're able to see that David Cook's initial idea and the Huizinga investment group was able to take this and blow it up, because this was something that a lot of people wanted, and they didn't realize the opportunity that was the video rental stores. And then in 1993, they had gotten up over 36,000 stores. And at this point, they were cruising. Blockbuster was by far the largest player in videotape rentals and all that good stuff. We also see in 2002, Redbox is founded. Now, this is going to come into play a little bit later, but at this point, this is massive Blockbuster. So there's a small company that has the idea of renting out videos to. That's nothing of Blockbuster's concern. They can dominate this business. And then in 2004, Blockbuster started releasing DVD rentals as well as the traditional VHS. And one of the other things that they did here was one of the things they had gotten a lot of blowback for was the late fees, because people would be hit with like a super penalty, is what it felt like when you brought a movie back a day late, and then you get hit by all these late fees, and it just kind of made the experience not what they wanted it to be. So Blockbuster decided to go ahead and completely nix those late fees, and it seemed like everything was going well. When you think about what Blockbuster had accomplished in just a few short decades, it's quite astonishing. They were able to take a small store that had just been started because of falling oil prices into a complete entertainment empire. In just a couple decades, when they were at their peak, they owned over 9,000 video rental stores across the U.S. and a couple internationally. Across the world, they employed over 84,000 people. And they had around 65 million registered customers with the card-carrying Blockbuster members. They had been once valued over $3 billion. They had a massive range of titles, and they were so big that for certain releases, they had exclusive deals with Blockbuster, where the only way you could watch this new release once it came out of theaters was going to a Blockbuster and renting it there. They developed a completely innovative barcode system that could track up to 10,000 VHSs per store, and they were able to later translate that into DVDs. But this had completely revolutionized the video rental industry and allowed Blockbuster to acclaim their success that they had reached up to this point. And they had a $6 million distribution center. So putting all these together, Blockbuster had really built themselves an empire. And it looked like they were just going to keep on going. But little did we know that there was something not so great on the horizon. And kind of showing how confident they were, here's a commercial that Blockbuster aired with their digitally rendered spokesperson, Carl the Rabbit and Ray the Guinea Pig.
Ray, check this out. New releases guaranteed in stock.
That means I'll have my favorite kind of movie. Kung Fu.
Did you just whack me with a carrot?
Oh, ninja mice.
At Blockbuster, the hottest new releases are guaranteed on DVD, so you'll always find your favorite movies.
Ow, ow, ow. Off me, you little varmints.
Make it a Blockbuster night.
So as you can see here, Blockbuster, this is commercial aired in the early 2000s. They had been so successful that a video rental store had the marketing budget to digitally CGI animate two spokespersons to create quick 20-second ads that they would air even on like the Super Bowl. So Blockbuster had grown massively, and the success was starting to go to their head, even to the point of guaranteeing their customers that their experience with Blockbuster was never going to change.
So now it's the mid-2000s, and man, has this Blockbuster thing really taken off. The Make It a Blockbuster Night movement has really resonated with people, and now everyone makes it a Blockbuster night every chance they can get. On the weekends, the stores were packed. Speaking from personal experience, I remember that there wasn't a single Friday night when the store wasn't packed. But a lot of people isn't a bad sign, right? Well, until you have to wait in lines that feel like you're waiting in them forever, trying to check out or trying to ask questions about movies. And often these lines ran throughout the entire store, making it a really tedious process. It was a nightmare. But hey, at least they have the hottest new releases guaranteed, right? Well, not really. If you see that big asterisk next to the word guaranteed, well, yeah, the movies aren't guaranteed. When reading the fine print, it says guaranteed or next time it's free. That is a really big assumption that there's going to be a next time after this terrible experience. So after looking throughout the entire store and not being able to find the movie that you're looking for, you now have to wait in line just to ask somebody whether or not a specific movie will be coming back into the store and when that might be happening. The process was super frustrating for customers, and often they'd leave empty-handed. So after leaving Blockbuster, you now remember that there's this new red box thing in your supermarket. You kind of thought it was a little bit weird and a little bit cheesy and never really checked it out until now. But hey, maybe there's a chance, maybe they'll have it. So now you go to your supermarket and you check out Redbox. Hey, it's already off to a much better start. No lines, thank goodness. And with the press of a few buttons, you find out that they actually have the movie you were looking for. This is so great, and your night that was starting off terrible with Blockbuster is now ending great with Redbox. And now you think to yourself, maybe next time I'll just skip all of the fuss at Blockbuster and go to Redbox from now on. Just as the experience began to sour for Blockbuster's customers in the mid-2000s, the same thing began happening for Blockbuster as a company. In 2004, as Joey mentioned, late fees were nixed. And while at first late fees being nixed seems like a great thing, it was ultimately the first major failure that sealed the fate on Blockbuster's slow and agonizing demise. Late fees were not only a huge source of revenue for Blockbuster. After ending late fees, they lost over $200 million in revenues, but they also caused a major holding pattern in the business's performance. Because people no longer felt the pressure to return DVDs, many decided to just keep the movie instead and ultimately buy it out. This caused massive shortages of hit movies and essentially turned many stores from movie rentals to movie sales. This really hurt Blockbuster in general because now they had no way to effectively manage their inventories and no way to know what to expect when movies would be returned. As it happened to me personally many times, customers would often go to the stores for multiple days in a row expecting to find one particular movie and ultimately leave empty-handed and disappointed without the movie that they were looking for. And again, while nixing late fees seemed like a great way to improve the customer experience, it ultimately created a paradox that made the customer satisfaction system practically non-existent. And with this, many people who were once in love with the idea of Blockbuster began shifting to other companies for their movie rental needs. Then things got worse in 2005 when Blockbuster tried to purchase Hollywood Video. And Hollywood Video was one of the large movie rental chains at the time and was one of Blockbuster's lead competitors. And while this wasn't really the end of the world, it did signal negative signals to investors and made people begin to question whether or not Blockbuster was truly as strong as they had once thought. If Blockbuster, which was a huge company, couldn't buy out one of its lesser competitors, what does that say about Blockbuster as a company? And 2005 also marks a huge turning point for Blockbuster in general, as sales began rapidly declining and they saw very, very low record lows. By 2007, Redbox had grown hugely. Redbox had more kiosks out in the world than Blockbuster had stores. And in this, we see that customers are really beginning to become truly disenchanted with the Blockbuster experience, and the idea of making it a Blockbuster night no longer has the same positive connotations it once did. By 2010, Blockbuster's problem had gotten so unmanageable that the company had to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And in just a 6-year period from 2004 to 2010, the company had become the complete opposite of what it once was. And in just 6 years, the company managed to seal its fate. In 2011, Blockbuster was acquired by Dish Network, and no shade against Dish, but you know it's bad when your saving grace is a mediocre cable company. To further prove how little Dish was able to save the company, just 2 years after acquiring Blockbuster, Dish closed all of its stores that it had purchased from Blockbuster. And realizing that Blockbuster's fate was sealed, Dish, back in 2011, began working to incorporate Blockbuster into its video-on-demand services that came with its cable packages. And ultimately, this plan was fruitless and still sits completely dormant. If you go to their website or even Blockbuster.com today, it simply redirects you to an outdated and poorly made website talking about how Blockbuster has been with Dish since 2011 and how there's still a way to make it a Blockbuster night. And wow, just reusing the same slogan again from over 20 years ago. Great work. And in the following years, the handful of independent Blockbuster stores that somehow managed to survive quickly went out of business. And by 2019, only one Blockbuster remains in the entire world and can be found in Bend, Oregon. So how did it come to this? How did something that was once seen as the pinnacle of the movie rental experience fall so far and fall so hard? Now obviously there was not one single business decision that contributed to the downfall of Blockbuster, and instead it was the culmination of many big and poor business decisions. For the sake of time and leaving room for discussion later, I want to boil Blockbuster's shortcomings down to a few key points. Their first major weakness behind the scenes was Blockbuster's poor business model. As we mentioned earlier, Blockbuster removing its late fees had terrible consequences for their business and cost them hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues, and ultimately caused their ability to service customer needs to fail. When they began realizing that nixing late fees was creating problems, they did nothing to change it. They also made numerous other poor business decisions which leads us into the next major shortcoming. The next major shortcoming was Blockbuster's poor management of its debts. By the end of 2010, the company had amassed debts over $1 billion. No matter how large a company is, having $1 billion in debt and mostly more makes it incredibly difficult to manage one's debts. Because of the poor handling of their debts, Blockbuster ultimately resorted to filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And moving on to the next major point, when Blockbuster first started out, they were highly innovative, utilizing barcode technologies that were cutting edge at the time. Specifically, it was this innovation and use of barcode technology that led to their initial success and allowed them to manage inventories of thousands upon thousands of movies. But as the years went on, Blockbuster began to slow its innovations. Blockbuster also failed to make its changes quickly and in a timely manner. They were 8 years late on the whole mail-in movies idea and 6 years behind on launching disc rental kiosks. This huge gap of time gave competitors the better part of a decade to move and to innovate without any sort of pressure from Blockbuster, and ultimately this allowed Blockbuster's competitors to perfect their process and overtake Blockbuster. The next major shortcoming was Blockbuster's poor execution once it did make changes. The company did try its hand at changing its fundamental business premise and move into other markets. At one point, it was even working with Enron and other companies to develop a video-on-demand service similar to what Netflix is today. But ultimately, when Enron went bankrupt, Blockbuster saw this as a bad omen and abandoned the idea, as well as over $200 million of investments. The video-on-demand service never made it past initial testing and was never released for public consumption. And after it was pretty much shelved, it was never ever touched again, and they completely abandoned the idea altogether, never making headway into video-on-demand services again. Blockbuster also tried its hand at disc rental kiosks. They called their version of their rental kiosks Blockbuster Express. And Blockbuster Express was not only late to the game, but did a worse job than its competitors. And just look at it. It looks like a weird combination between a vending machine and an ATM. For this, also, people reported that the system was very hard to use and made it very unclear on what movies they had and, in general, when movies were supposed to be returned. So overall, Blockbuster did many poor business decisions that led to its downfall. But Blockbuster's bad business practices weren't the only thing that put Blockbuster in the grave.
One of the other things that put Blockbuster in the grave were their competitors, and I'm sure all of you know what Netflix is. A lot of people believe one of the main reasons Blockbuster failed is due to Netflix because they compare it to being able to stream videos, but that is not what Netflix first started out as. Netflix actually started out as a DVD mailing service. A Netflix subscriber would pay $20 a month, and in return, the subscriber would receive in his mailbox or her mailbox up to 3 DVDs at the same time. Once the subscribers return the DVDs, Netflix would eventually send them the next DVD in their online rental queue, which was whatever movie was on their wish list. This model meant that subscribers could keep the movies for as long as they wanted and eliminated the unpleasant late fees. This is especially important to founder Reed Hastings. Hastings is often quoted saying that he decided to start Netflix after being fined a $40 fee at a Blockbuster store for being late to return a copy of Apollo 13. Furthermore, Netflix paid for the DVD transportation costs, and usually it was sent via first-class mail by the U.S. Postal Service. Blockbuster executives first dismissed Netflix as a threat, as they believed that the DVD mail service would not appeal to the largely impulsive motivated majority of their renters, and it would eventually only capture a small fraction of the rental market. But by 2002, Netflix was already publicly traded. Its revenues had doubled since 2001, and it had close to 1 million subscribers, even though its net income was still negative. Blockbuster's first indirect reaction came in the mid-2000s when the movie Freedom Pass was unveiled. Under this subscription, Blockbuster customers would pay a monthly fee between $25 to $30, and you would be able to take 3 DVDs or tapes home at a time without due dates or late fees, but would still have to go to the Blockbuster store to pick up and drop off movies. Already mentioned a few times throughout this presentation is Redbox, another competitor of Blockbuster. Redbox broke out as a new era of video rentals on a national basis. The Redbox fleet of kiosks, initially offering overnight rentals of DVDs for $1, grew rapidly. These machines were conveniently located within or just outside locations of popular retail chains such as Walmart and Walgreens. The Redbox revolution proved to be a significant player in the final downfall of former video rental giants such as Blockbuster. While a major part of the Redbox advantage was its low and simple rental price, Redbox kiosks were also available 24/7. Previously hated late fees at Blockbuster were a simple extension of the $1 per night rate and thus never really an issue for Redbox customers. Blockbuster started to rev up closings and showed another factor responsible for its downfall, which is its tendency to be a copycat rather than an innovator. Previously, the company had attempted to copy the Netflix mail-out concept as an enhancement to its grand fleet of stores. Obviously, this never really worked out. Then, to mimic the success of Redbox, Blockbuster also tried to create a Redbox kiosk imitator, the Blockbuster Express, as Ryan showed you guys earlier. Blockbuster Express never really took off as the Redbox chain did. Redbox, being first, had gained the advantage of placement at many of the most desirable national chains. Blockbuster Express continued to disappoint. Partnering with several regionally admired chains such as Publix, Blockbuster Express machines were often a disadvantage. While the chains were well shopped, Express machines were often located inside stores and thus were unavailable after closing hours. To make matters worse, these closing hours varied by day and location. Now that we have talked about the whole story, these are a couple of the key takeaways we have gathered from this analysis. As Joey and Ryan mentioned how important the customer experience truly was, eventually Blockbuster failed to understand that customer experience and how to build their business model around it. Another key takeaway is instead of trying to focus on what made them different, Blockbuster tried to do everything that their competitors did, as you can see through Netflix and Redbox. The third key takeaway would be that Blockbuster failed to recognize market trends. When it finally did recognize those trends, it was years too late. Think about movie nights now. No longer do customers have to drive across town to a store to watch their next movies. Instead, now movie night planning can be done from your favorite seat in your living room. Rather than walking down aisles of DVD cases, you can simply scroll through a list of the top movies and TV shows on your favorite streaming platform, never having to worry about the title that you want to be watching being out of stock. Today, when making plans for movie night, Blockbuster doesn't occupy a single second of the consideration. Blockbuster has fallen so far that the final Blockbuster in existence, which is in Bend, Oregon, has decided to completely change business models, moving from a video rental store to an Airbnb, where you can rent out the space to have a movie marathon with your closest friends and family, as you'll see here on the next slide in the video.
So we're opening it up for 3 nights in September, the 18th, 19th, and 20th. and we are turning the center of the store into a living room. And it's going to have the fold-out couch, it's got the widescreen, big console television, it's got VCRs, it's got the old throwback radio with the cassette tapes. We even have set up a closet with 90 clothes in it. So the whole idea is to have people come in and to treat this like their living room for the evening. We'll have popcorn and snacks and all kinds of great things to really kind of conclude the evening.
And people can just watch as many movies as they want while they're there?
As many as they can, as long as they want, all evening long. Hopefully they can get a little sleep in there, but if they don't, if they stay up like a slumber party and watch movies all night, that's great. But this is the first time.
These are the questions that we have decided to help lead the discussion board on Blockbuster's failure. What do you think made Blockbuster so successful in the first place? Do you think that Blockbuster was always destined to fail, or do you think Blockbuster had a chance to still be around today? What would you have done differently if you were the CEO of Blockbuster? People often blame Netflix as the sole reason for Blockbuster's downfall. Why do you think this is the case? Why do you think Blockbuster customers were still so loyal, even as the customer experience worsened? Do you think Blockbuster can make a comeback? If so, how do you think Blockbuster could differ today? What are your memories/opinions of Blockbuster? Make sure to sign off on the discussion board with your favorite movie title or character as your alias.